Today is Sunday, February 24th, and this is Celtics Beat on the CLNS Media Network, the leading online provider of audio-video coverage of the Boston Celtics. I'm Adam Kaufman. Episode 303, featuring ESPN writer Kevin Arnovitz, is brought to you by betonline.ag. Go to clnsmedia.com/win or use the promo code CLNS50 to get a 50% bonus on your next deposit. Show also brought to you by Mint Mobile. Get your new wireless plan and a new SIM card shipped to you for free for just $15 at mintmobile.com/podcast. Also, we are brought to you by The Athletic. Get 40% off your monthly subscription just by going to theathletic.com/CelticsBeat. All right, everyone, second half, quote-unquote, is underway. Adam Kaufman here with you on Celtics Beat. Welcome in. Get me on Twitter, at Adam M. Kaufman. All the usual spiel. Subscribe to the show, yada, yada, yada. Search iTunes, Celtics Beat. You'll get us, all right? We're underway. All-Star break is over. There's a ton going on, a lot of drama behind us, a lot of uncertainty concerning the future. I want to dive into all of it. Preamble ends there. Let's welcome in our guest. Kevin Arnovitz covers the NBA for ESPN The Magazine and ESPN.com. Kevin, we have been trying to connect for this interview literally since last year's playoffs, so I'm thrilled to have you here.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
So we got a lot to talk about, especially as it centers around Kyrie Irving, and we'll get to him in a second. I don't really want to focus on the Celtics-Bucks game beyond saying it was an ugly first half, more competitive second half once everyone kind of shook off the All-Star break rust, and then a disappointing ending for C's fans. But bigger picture, 3 meetings so far between these teams. Milwaukee's won 2, though Boston has consistently been shorthanded. If there is a playoff rematch, knowing what you know right now, what's your view of that series?
I think it's going to be an exceptionally entertaining and really fun series. And actually, I do think it's a series that we're going to see a game or two played in the 90s. I think these are probably the 2 best defensive teams in basketball. I mean, I would suspect the Utah Jazz would be in that category, maybe at the conclusion of the season. I still think they're sort of recapturing what they've had. But, you know, I think kind of lost in all this is just how good defensively Milwaukee is. And I mean, the Celtics, I only saw kind of the last 14, 16 minutes of the game. I was at Staples Center. But, you know, the Celtics are so disciplined defensively. You know, it's why I think they're very scary. And I was talking about this with a colleague, like, as we were watching the game. And it was just like, look, I mean, I still think, you know, the Celtics are a team that's going to be reckoned with. And it's because disciplined defenses, I think, really thrive in the playoffs. And it's just, you know, I mean, I'm also interested to see how Milwaukee's. I mean, I've been really frustrated at times with their late game offense, and it's a team I absolutely love, and they're still sort of my, you know, they're still my holder right now as my pick to come out of the East, just because I just think they're doing so many things well, and there's just sort of an adherence to identity. But I do worry a little bit about that late game offense, and it's kind of bewildering because, you know, they just run this beautiful stuff. They have this read and react system, and perhaps that's it. Perhaps the decision-making, you know, ad hoc in stressful moments is less, you know, forgiving than if you have a set and you're getting the right shot for the right guy at the right times, you know, with sort of staged choreography. And look, both those teams do a lot of read and react. I mean, the Celtics, I think, still are fundamentally a read and react team. And that's a good thing. Their offense isn't as well oiled right now, I think, as Milwaukee's. But I kind of trust their defense, and, you know, possibly because it's been something constructed over, you know, a series of years, and also because Al Horford is still, in my opinion, kind of one of the great underrated players of his time.
Well, you got to be careful who you say that around this city. You get it's really quite a split.
In trouble for calling a guy underrated.
A lot of it comes back to the contract more than anything else, far more than the play or anything. There's a division of people. You have, you know, one camp, and I am in it, and I'm right like you, thinking he's underrated, believing that he's so important to this team. He's not necessarily he's playing well right now, but much of this year, mainly because of the injury he was dealing with, wasn't as effective as he was last year. If he finishes the way he's going right now and into the playoffs, and we see playoff Al Horford like last year, then terrific. But there is a large segment of people that will always look at him and expect, because of the way he's paid the way he is, to be a guy he's never been, which is a 20-10 guy, just because, hey, max contract, you should put up certain numbers. It sort of comes down to an argument of how well do you understand, how closely do you watch the game?
But these are presumably the same people who think Marcus Smart is a world beater, even though he doesn't put up kind of conventional stats.
No, I think actually those two are probably linked in that if you think Al Horford's underrated, you also greatly appreciate all the things that Marcus Smart does and does well, whereas the people that think Al Horford is overpaid are also the same people that think Marcus Smart puts up too many threes and he's not a good offensive player, and you people who love Marcus Smart vastly overrate the guy. So I think those camps are actually somewhat similar.
Yeah, and this is a larger, I think, philosophical question for sports fans, which is, once a guy is signed and the team furnishes him with money, is he graded relative to that contract,
Right.
as if people are in the business of rejecting the large amount of money versus the small amount of money.
I think it always just comes down to, market value is market value. Like Gordon Hayward, even if he didn't get hurt and resembled the player he was in Utah, is he still a guy that should be whatever he is, the sixth highest paid player in the NBA? Of course not, but that's what market value was at the time. That's what you had to do to sign him.
Well, and there are also kind of structural considerations with the CBA, which is you're always going to have this sort of strange thing where, hey, Mike Conley will be the highest paid player at the time. Why? Because he's a 10-year service guy coming out at the right time,
right.
Or his contract's coming out at the right time.
Right.
And, the max sort of provides a sort of artificial ceiling, right? Like LeBron is going to make what Gordon Hayward makes at times, and like that's just one of the vagaries of the system, which actually, frankly, why I'm against the max system. I mean, we're getting into the weeds here, but
yeah.
I just think Horford he's so good defensively. I think he allows Brad to do what Brad fundamentally wants to do offensively, and you can't do that without spacing. I think there's always a bit of Brad that probably grits his teeth a little bit when Baines is out there, or someone with not conventional stretch. I mean, Baines actually, as we all know, it's become sort of serviceable. But Al kind of gives you an entire other dimension also because Al knows where to go in space. Mm-hmm. Al cannot touch the ball in a possession, and he will make a possession happen sheerly by knowing improvisationally where to go. I mean, Rob Mahoney of Sports Illustrated has a sort of a maxim where he says he judges people on two criteria in life: how they treat waitstaff and what they think about Horford's game. And I sort of have submitted to this as kind of a brilliant construct for. Yeah, and again, I don't want to overrate the guy. I don't think he's one of the 5 or 10 best players in basketball, but I just think he's kind of vitally important for what they do, and sort of like it's a team that's going to sort of I think subsist on sort of a collective intelligence, and I think he's a big part of that.
Kevin, it's just for Boston in general, it's really been a whirlwind 5 weeks or so. Marcus Morris said the C's weren't having fun despite a stretch that they were winning 12 out of 15 going into the break. Kyrie Irving calls out the younger guys on the team again in a chat with your colleague Rachel Nichols. Then he vents at the media recently for being too intrusive when he was videoed talking to Kevin Durant All-Star Weekend in the hallway. Specific to Irving, and I hope you like talking about him because we're going to do a lot on Kyrie Irving right here, but all the ups, all the downs of his season to this point. What I'm really wondering, one of the reasons that I wanted to have you here as opposed to a Celtics beat writer or someone really tied into Boston, what's the national perception of him? I
mean, I think the national perception of him, he is an ungodly shot maker. I mean, we were just watching that kind of reverse up in the final 4 minutes the other night. Imagine just kind of journalists and scouts, a lot of real basketball people, kind of development guys eating dinner before the game after the sort of the warm-ups are concluded, and so we're all watching this game on a huge television before the Lakers Rockets, and just sort of the absolute awe in which we don't know that there's a better shot maker in the league, and how vital that is in sort of postseason situations where frankly the game does degenerate into this often mano a mano or put the ball in the hands of that guy. I mean, we saw Kyrie win a Game 7 in 2016. So I think there's that. And he's also an incredibly eccentric guy, a guy who hasn't fully grasped the nuances of leadership. Granted, one who's been put in a difficult position in this respect. His team succeeded without him. Mm-hmm. So he becomes sort of the newest incarnation of the Patrick Ewing theory. This team that overachieves, minus him, minus Gordon. And so he comes back and for whatever reason, the team, isn't succeeding relative to expectations. And so, everybody kind of looks at the equation. What's the variable here? Oh, this guy, and yet all the while, he thinks he probably wants to lead. And I say that conditionally because, I don't know. It'll be really interesting to see his decision this offseason. I still believe he'll end up back in Boston. And I don't say that with any great intel. I mean, I with a little bit of intel, like if everybody else is putting the probability at 52%, I probably put it at 69 or 70. Mm-hmm. And that's based on some intel, but not a great deal. But I just think he's regarded as just ungodly as a shot maker. A guy who's, I think, compensated for a lot of his defensive issues. And that's saying a lot. I mean, I think there's a lot of praise there. Anytime, and Ray Allen was this guy, right? I mean, he was part of one of the worst defensive teams in history in Seattle, comes to Boston. We're all saying, how on earth can they even have a top 10 defense if that guy's sort of at the time, your wing defender at the 2, which at the time was a big deal when he actually had shooting guards in this league who could score. Now we have like 4 of them. And, lo and behold, they put up, they become the greatest defense of all time, in 08-09, or I'm sorry, 07-08.
Right.
So, I mean, I think there's a lot of, I would say there's a lot of respect. I think that's actually something people forget about, except the true junkies, that he's become passable and occasionally engaged and, engaged enough when it matters. And, that's something. But yeah, he's truly eccentric. And, but it's just a guy who just strikes fear in you in a late possession game.
Since you brought it up, I was going to do it a little bit later on, but since you brought it up in terms of his future, and you can only reveal so much clearly, but let's chip away just a little bit about that intel to this end. If you are to believe he's 70% chance that he returns to Boston, and I know there are a lot of people like you alluded to nationally who would put it far lower. I think there are a lot of people around Boston that believe it is higher. You can put biases wherever you want. But if there's something in particular or some things that alter that decision, that make him totally flop on everything he said going into the season, that he wants to retire in Boston and wants to be part of this long term, and that 70% that you said goes the other way, the 30% wins out, what is it? What changes course?
I think kind of an ugly second-round exit where, and sort of the blame really comes down on him. And Boston can be a very unforgiving place about that. Everything's under a microscope. There's a certain, and I don't want to be overly critical here to your audience, but there's a certain brand of hysteria that exists in Boston that it doesn't even exist in New York or Chicago. And, that I think, so often while we sit here and speculate in February and March, and, I've had this conversation with high-profile players, like the information isn't in the bank yet. Like there is nothing, there are few things, I say, more pivotal than playoff fate. I mean, I often wonder, if the Thunder are up 3-1 in 2016 over the Warriors in the Western Conference Finals. I mean, one of the great counterfactuals in NBA-like history is like, okay, so what if that happens? I mean, what if the Thunder close them out? What kind of conversation are we having? And maybe he takes a 1 year and kind of plays at LeBron. But I think for Kyrie, I just don't think all the information, the election returns aren't in yet, right? Like how are they going to fare this postseason? And then I think there's probably a conversation with Danny and Kyrie and his people, which is, okay, let's talk AD here. Is this a pivotal factor? Is this, how badly do you want this? Are you too interested in building something together?
Take a quick break to tell you today's show is brought to you by BetOnline.ag. Lots of good NBA games coming up this week to throw some money on. Celtics have a back-to-back with the Raptors and Blazers Tuesday and Wednesday. You got a clash with the Wizards on Friday. You can go to BetOnline.ag today to get in on the action. BetOnline.ag is CLNS Media's preferred online sportsbook. Go to clnsmedia.com/win. Get a 50% bonus when you sign up, or use the promo code CLNS50. Don't be left on the sideline with all this excitement going on the court. Plus, you can play in BetOnline's virtual casino and make some real cash there too. Whatever you do, make sure you use betonline.ag and use the promo code CLNS50 for a 50% bonus on your first deposit. Or just go to clnsmedia.com/win. All right, back to the show. Do you think any of Boston's future or Irving's future in Boston is dependent upon Danny Ainge's ability to deal for Anthony Davis? I say that, I guess, in the sense of, do you see a scenario where he still returns even if Davis ends up getting traded to the Lakers or somewhere else?
Oh, sure. I see it. I see a scenario. Sure. I mean, the interesting thing is we've kind of focused on Davis, but I mean, they have assets. If not that guy, I mean, there might be some other guy. I mean, you just don't know. And but I think it's measurably tethered to Davis. I don't think entirely, and I think probably people are overstating it a little bit. But I do think it's got to be a factor. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I truly believe that Kyrie wants to win. I mean, that's always the cloud hanging over New York. Is there's just, I mean, if you're an empiricist and it's like, well, have we seen it? What in recent history suggests that this franchise can foster winning? Now, there's also the issue of, top 10 players, and if you consider Kyrie, let's call it top 15, wherever you put them, also tend to have great confidence in themselves. And there is also this sense of, but they've never had me there. Right. And that's a good thing. I mean, that's why these guys are them, right? Is they actually truly believe that. They believe that they have the superpower to turn one of the most woebegone franchises in sports. I mean, let's just call it the Knicks are a freaking train wreck. And they've been a train wreck forever. I mean, and it's not just, they've underachieved. Like, they haven't been able to get free agents. I mean, Charlie Ward, I think, was the most, like, the last kind of free agent they signed kind of out. Someone told me this stat lately, and I was going through it. And I was like, oh, God, they're right. So
when your most high-profile free agent signing is a football player.
Yeah, I mean, and so, but, on the other hand, you have incredible talents who, their view of the world is, but they haven't had me yet. I actually believe Kyrie enjoys, despite his, and I have some sympathy for the kind of the Durant video stuff. I mean, it gets a little, I imagine, and I'm obviously pro-journalism and pro-media. I mean, I imagine it gets, the guy is his friend. I mean, All-Star Weekend's basically just kind of a retreat for the NBA's elite. And these guys really generally like each other and, and they're fun. I also think that they like flirting. I mean, I do think that there's a sense that Kyrie enjoys speculation a little more than they let on. The way I think Durant, likes the speculation more than he lets on. I think they like the privilege of venting about it, but I don't know that the indignation is always sincere.
Well, here, let me cut you off with that. Just for anyone, if you happen to live under a rock and you haven't heard some of the rant, Irving, he went off when asked about his chat with KD. This is some of what he had to say.
What I do in my life is my business. So it's none of yours, none of anybody's. It's not anybody's business, right? So it's a video of me and one of my best friends talking. And then it turns out to be a dissection of a free agency meeting. Get that? Like, do you get that? And I'm asked questions about it. Like that's what disconnects me from all that. Like, because I have no connection to that. Over a video, I'm asking questions about the fans. You brought up the fans. Come on, man. You do it for the likes and clicks. Everybody does. Everybody wants to hear me talk like this. Like, everybody wants to hear every athlete talk about bull like this. It just makes no sense.
So, Kevin, I actually happen to be one of the few people around here that, as much as I can't stand a lot of Kyrie's tone or dismissiveness or attitude or message or belief in the way that he does or says things a lot of the time, in this particular instance, I think he's right. I think he has a right to be upset with being grilled about what was effectively, and I realize this is a weird construct of a sentence, but effectively a private chat in a public hallway. I find it very hard to believe, maybe I'm wrong, I find it very hard to believe that just right out there in the open, they're having a conversation about where they want to play together next year, and that Kyrie's two fingers going up are about max contracts, as the lip readers of the world were trying to figure out. I do think in this situation he's being treated a bit unfairly.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think we share sort of. I'm not a huge fan of his sort of leadership style. I think he's still kind of learning it, and again, I think he might figure out that he doesn't necessarily want that as the sole. He doesn't want to be a kind of the judge, jury, and executioner in the locker room. At the same time, I mean, the thing fans have to understand is, like, these guys are effectively colleagues. I mean, they're both Nike guys. They run in similar circles. I mean, these guys do have lives that are about things. I mean, think about everybody listening kind of at your workplace. How often in the break room or at lunch or just BSing near the cubicles is the conversation actually about work, right?
Sure.
I mean, we can all perform this exercise, right? You're talking about last night's game. You're talking about Game of Thrones. You're talking about your girl, your guy. I mean, whatever. Just let's think about, kind of use the parallel. where are you going to go for dinner? We went to last night at this party, right? I mean, I imagine All-Star Weekend, that occupies a great deal of the conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, this notion that that's because we care about where they're playing next year, that would be where these two guys are talking about, and not like get a load of what so-and-so did last night at the at the party at the Ritz or whatever it is.
Well, but also to Kyrie's point, removing even the substance of that conversation, because like you said, who the hell knows? It's still like that conversation happening in the cafeteria at your workplace that I'm observing from 10, 15 feet away. That conversation's none of my business. Even though it happened in the public, that doesn't mean I can come over and say, hey, what were you talking about? And you have to tell me.
Right. I mean, and that is the thing, right? Like, you're asking me to relay the contents of a private conversation, even as a public person. And so I kind of felt for him yesterday, and I rarely do that. I mean, I do think the performative aspect. I mean, I think Durant's shtick, meanwhile, Durant wasn't even pissed off about being asked about free agency, because no one in Oakland's asked him about free agency. I mean, that was a farce. He was pissed off at Ethan Strauss because Ethan Strauss, relayed a story from a teammate that, Durant is pissed off because he's not regarded in the same kind of category as LeBron, despite winning these championships, despite being the MVP, despite being what he thinks is the best player on the best team. And lo and behold, we still kind of put him on a rung below, right? And I mean, that's why he was pissed off at Strauss. It had nothing to do with questions that don't even exist. No one in Oakland has asked him about free agency in years. I'm sorry, we're not talking Durant. I just, but it kind of reminded me. I mean, this is where
very similar.
I'm sympathetic to Kyrie, and I don't buy Durant's act at all.
I get that.
Give Kyrie this. I know he sneaks out once in a while, but that guy faces the music too. He doesn't take 9 days off hiatus, unless I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, he does.
He generally faces the music.
Yeah, more often than not, he meets with the media, and I'm certain he does it when he doesn't feel like doing it. I just, going back to the leadership stuff, Kyrie doesn't know how to lead. He says he wants to, seems to believe, this is maybe where he gets in trouble a little bit, he seems to believe that he should be a leader simply because he's won a title or he's the most talented player on the team, but it doesn't work that way. You don't get to automatically be a leader just because you say you are, and I think that's why a lot of the time this season he has alluded to the need for leadership on this team. He can't get out of his own way. He's a big prisoner in the moment. He says what he feels, like before the season, talking about a future in Boston, to a couple of weeks ago with the ask me July 1st about my free agent future, puts his foot in his mouth all too often, says it won't happen again, and then it happens again, like calling out the kids, I shouldn't have done it that way, I'm not going to do that again, and then chatting with Rachel Nichols at the All-Star break once again, talks about the maturity of the Jason Tatums and Jaylen Browns and Terry Roziers of the world. Is it that he just can't get out of his own way or doesn't care, or is it that, I don't know, maybe he creates some of this drama because he does like it and just wants the attention, doesn't really care how he gets it?
I mean, I think in terms of sort of opening his mouth, I think it's just impulse control. I mean, I think it's advisable. I mean, look, as much as we love to say, oh, that guy's unvarnished honesty, like, I do think there is value in sort of putting a filter, particularly given the media landscape, particularly since literally 10 seconds after you utter it, it's going to be circulating in the ether. I just honestly, I think so much of these conversations about behavior really come down to impulse control. And I don't even think, and by the way, yeah, that also impacts leadership. And to your point, it makes it much more difficult to leave. I mean, again, I think 40% of it is like this weird Ewing effect circumstance, right? Like the level of degree, because guess what? The guy has won a championship, right? Like, he did take the biggest shot, in the last decade in the NBA, other than probably Ray Allen in Miami, but. I mean, he does have a claim on, quote, leading by example, right? But it is, again, there's just an impulse control, and frankly, I mean, the other problem is I can't get in the locker room, but my understanding from everybody I talked to is those guys actually demonstrate great maturity for their age. Yeah. I think it's something you have to recognize if you're Kyrie, right? Like, these guys this isn't Dion Waiters in year 3 here, man. like you're not, I mean, like, these guys have demonstrated exceptional leadership. I mean, I don't love Jason's shot selection all the time this year. I mean, the hazards of working out with Kobe all summer.
Right.
But man, I mean, that guy has demonstrated real maturity. So, like, part of it is like giving credit where credit's due. it's not just praising a guy after a good game. I mean, it's sort of acknowledging that, and one of the things that really good leader stars do is it's sort of it's giving guys even if you regard yourself as the sort of leading authority on the team, you give guys the impression that they actually have a piece of the enterprise, right? Like, even if you don't think privately that Jaylen Brown has staked himself to any claim of leadership, let him believe he has. Like, that's what really good, leaders Tim Duncan was sort of the master at this, right? Letting himself get balled out every day by Pop, feeling like, hey, this guy is the fair-haired child today, even if he wasn't, right? And I think that's just there's so many nuances to leadership. And I just think, the interesting thing is I think Kyrie actually has a very complicated inner life, but I also think he kind of misses so many of the nuances of leadership and just sort of, it's real kind of, it's really nuanced. It's really complex. It's just knowing, it's just having an emotional IQ. And, I don't know that he has it. And I think he may one day. The funny thing is I thought the LeBron acknowledgement was smart. I also think that you have to be careful of the subtext. There's a way to do that. There's a way to sort of own up and say, hey, and I just don't think he empowers. And it's a real problem.
I think that's all true. And going back to something you said before, I said this at the time of the trade. I was one of the very few around Boston who was critical of the trade when it was made. And I do think that there are very few ways this trade, looking back when we do years from now, could be a loss or even a break even. I guess it's a break even if they win nothing and he leaves after this year, and then how can you say it's a win? But it's not a devastating loss because Isaiah Thomas has been nothing since. The Nets pick wasn't number 1, it was number 8. It was Sexton, big deal, Jay Crowder, whatever. So it's the high upside continues to exist clearly on the Boston side. But one thing that I said and maintain, and it does fly in the face of something you said, is I just don't know that winning is all that important to him, that it is a top priority, despite it obviously being something that he talks about all the time. He wanted out of a championship-level situation with LeBron. He may jump ship here in Boston for an inferior option like New York, which at least is inferior if it's just him. Maybe it's different if Durant is with him or Davis is with him or they find a way to turn that dumpster fire upside down. But what really interests me, Kevin, is that based on my Twitter mentions, fans around here claim, and I stress that word, they claim they are fed up with Kyrie to the point where they say, as much as I find this hard to believe, that they won't care if he walks this summer. That even the lack of cap space and that your replacement is Terry Rozier, they don't care because they're so tired of listening to the guy talk. I think it's insane for a range of reasons, but how big a blow would that be when you do look back and say Boston reached the conference finals without him, 9-2 this year when he's out, the drama we've witnessed throughout this season. Thomas only annoyed people by talking about getting paid and the Brinks truck and all of that. Would Irving's loss just not be that devastating?
All right, so I'll take issue with two things. One is I actually kind of think he was smart in Cleveland. He got out ahead of the cavalry, right? Because LeBron was leaving, and he didn't want to be in a situation where, now look at me and I'm locked up, and now it's me and Gilbert, and it's just I have no qualm with that. I thought he put together a really admirable list of places. It wasn't lost to me. That San Antonio was on that list. That to me reflects in Boston, right? That reflects a desire to win. Now, I agree with you in this sense that saying you want to win and actually doing what is necessary from a leadership standpoint. But I think he thinks he wants to win, and again, I think he's just fiercely competitive. Now, there's where I think the Celtics fans that won't care are wrong. A, I happen to think he's a really valuable player, but B, you never want a team that is capped out to lose that guy for nothing, right? Like I just think it's just bad. Control the asset. You sign him and want to trade him in another year. Boy, you'd have takers for Kyrie on a 4-year deal, right? You would really, because that's a max guy that I think a lot of front offices around the league would perceive as a max player, and if he just becomes, toxic, and I don't think. Look, he's mercurial, and it's funny. And it's true, But, I mean, there are no – I mean, you know, we sort of, I think, get spoiled by Steph, and I think Giannis is going to be one of these guys, but just a lot of these guys at that level. I mean, Durant's like that. You know, we can go – AD is like that. And, you know, you talk to sort of really hysterical New Orleans fans, and they're sort of like, what the hell did he ever win here? That, I think, is, you know, he's not durable. You know, he's not kind of – he doesn't have the sort of it factor. You know, he's not a killer. All right, congratulations, you swept Portland. You know, hey, all this, hey, who are we not surrounding you with? You know, Drew Holiday is a guy that 29 other teams would like. I mean, you have a great running mate, you know, like, lift these guys up. If you're LeBron, if you're, if you're whoever, I mean, so none of these guys are perfect with the exception, of course, of Steph and, maybe Giannis. But you go through the top 10 players, they're all kind of problematic in some ways, even LeBron to some extent, right? They're all a little bit, it's difficult and at times problematic. And that's the thing. So kind of be careful what you wish for. And if they're not problematic that way, it's maybe they're too reticent, like, Davis or, but we could go through that roster and of players and find, and pick the nits of every one of them. I'm not saying I'm a huge Kyrie guy and this sort of persona leadership, and I know it can be difficult to listen to the guy, but like even just watching last night, watching some of these games, watching that Toronto game, just remember that is ultimately the bulk of your grade. And, when I watched that, Toronto game from a hotel room the week before Thanksgiving, oh, man. It's just like there are not that many guys who can do that. That's a big win against a conference rival. Last night, if not for a couple of, and I know he had a bad shooting night in the first half, but there are just not a lot of guys who can, do that. So just kind of be careful what you wish for. Now, again, to your point, if they have a second-round exit and all of a sudden it's like, well, what is the track record here exactly? His absence produced one of the more sort of encouraging seasons in recent Celtic history. His presence produced one of the more disappointing seasons in Celtic history. The proof is in the pudding. Who cares? I can get that a little bit. But let's see how it plays out. I still think the Celtics are scary.
Your answer to this question would be different, clearly, based on whether he decides to resign or whether he decides to leave. But just looking at it right now and all that has happened this season, all the drama that we've been talking about, and who knows what's in store over the next couple of months, do you believe that Danny Ainge gambled on the wrong guy when he traded Isaiah Thomas, Jay Crowder, and that last unprotected Nets pick for Irving?
No, not at all. He look, paying Isaiah would have been a real problem, and we all know that. And I know the guy was great, and it was a great story, and he was sort of the embodiment of the ascension, right? This team that went through this difficult rebuild, he sort of consummated or provided the crescendo of where they, and I think, but paying him is going to be a problem. And just look what's happened. No fault of his. It's just the injury. Small point guards can be, certain liability over time. Jay, he got at the height of his value. Jay's a really nice player. I'm a big Jay Crowder guy. I've been a big Jay Crowder guy. He's kind of one of those no-stat all-stars, the advanced numbers I've always loved, and I'm kind of one of those bow at the altar of analytics guys to some extent. I still think chemistry is important. And then the pick ultimately kind of, all of a sudden Brooklyn started playing basketball. So, and overachieving under Kenny Atkinson. So I do think that it was a great trade. It was a great trade. You go and get that guy. Hey, if it turns out, his leadership style is a little lacking, okay. That's a risk you take. But, man, look at that deal. I don't know where this team is right now with Thomas and Hayward, Al and the young guys. Maybe the young guys develop. Maybe they, there are all these sort of weird variables and counterfactuals and butterfly effects. Kyrie really opens the floor up for wings. He just does in a way that Isaiah, doesn't. As good a penetrator as he is. I just, maybe Jason is, 17% worse or 28% worse. You just don't know. So it's hard to say. I love that trade, and I still love that trade. It's the right trade to make.
All right, I think that's more than enough Kyrie for now. Let's just for a moment go back to Davis, because all the narrative is he just doesn't want to be in Boston. He tried to squash that at the All-Star game.
I never said Boston wasn't on my list. I never said it was not on my list. I never said it was not on my list.
All right, so that's because Davis later said that all 29 other teams are on his list in an interview with NBA TV. Even his dad piggybacked on it back around the Super Bowl, saying he doesn't want him here in Boston. Here's my question that I feel like is not being dissected enough. Why wouldn't the C's be in consideration?
All right, so first of all, I think a lot of that early on was posturing. He wanted to be in Los Angeles. He wanted to basically convey to the Pelicans and the Celtics, you're going to need to stand down this summer unless you want me as a rental, right? I mean, I think a lot of that was posturing early on because he wanted to be a Laker by the All-Star break. And so the way, I mean, think about that list. It was literally the three teams that had no capacity to deal for him, right? I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't know that he's dying to play with Giannis Antetokounmpo in one of the league's smallest markets. Maybe, I don't know. A guy who plays his position, by the way, and he's been very adamant that he's not a five. I talked to him one-on-one as recently as a few months ago, and he was adamant that he's not really a five. So, I mean, I think there's no coincidence with that. Now, it's interesting. I mean, I think Garnett really changed the conversation. I do think there is still a sense, and it kind of just dates back, and it's probably not I'm not going to tell what people should or should not feel, but I don't know that it should hold in this day and age. But I still think there's a reputation for Boston, just given the legacy of it as a sports town, that it's not a place where African-American players have historically, I want to say this, wanted to play. I mean, Garnett said as much prior to the deal. Now, I think that 2008 through 2011 team really changed the tune on that. And I think that's a great thing because, it's just such a storied franchise with, a rabid fan base and should, by all accounts, have every consideration if you're truly interested in winning, right? It's cold. I know it sounds weird. I know he comes from Chicago, but it's really cold in Boston. I think, and I know that Bostonians have no reverence or affinity for Los Angeles, which is where I live. It's a really nice place to be a young guy with money. I mean, it is it's kind of a playground. I mean, just saying nothing of the climate and just, the Laker aura, it just is a really pleasant place to live if you have money. In a way that, no disrespect to Boston, it's just, it's an older, different kind of city with a different kind of soul. And intelligent people can disagree as a matter of taste on that, right? And it doesn't have necessarily that garden appeal, and there's something about New York City, and I just think it's sort of, I think for guys, it's just in their imagination, it's just not necessarily a place that's kind of on the A list. It's like on the B list. That said, I think the Celtics should do it if they can, or pursue them. I don't want to make the do they deal Tatum thing because I that's a different conversation. But I do think that guys are also indicating that they can be persuaded once they get there. I mean, I think Paul George has totally changed the mindset of every front office in the league. And I think that most franchises now are starting to get up the confidence to say, if we can get here and he can immerse himself in our culture, in our winning, we can retain him. Let's bet on ourselves. And I think the other factor is I call it the Warriors factor, which is teams want to roll the dice. Like you can't be conservative anymore. Mm-hmm. That's not to say you can't be deliberate in your rebuild, but it's sort of Houston kind of pushed all in, and I think they're still glad they did. They were up 3-2. I mean, their failure to close that series wasn't a failure of, a sort of a talent deficit. I mean, the bad luck with Paul and everything, but I think that is also another factor. So I think Paul George, when combined with the Warriors, is sort of we just need to, we need to push our chips in. I mean, being risk averse is almost a guarantee in this league, that you'll be consigned to, being in the upper middle class, but you'll never kind of get to the elite. And I think that is sort of, a big thing. I mean, that I think speaks to Toronto, right? I mean, Cy Ujiri, the president of basketball operations in Toronto, said, maybe Kawhi wants to be here, maybe he can't. We're going to win. He's going to immerse himself in the city that I think once guys really kind of get exposed to, they really like. It's again another rabid fan base. You get to be king of a country, and management treats people well. Like, I mean, I think it just, I know the DeMar thing notwithstanding. I mean, I think it is a place where, hey, no, but I think you go to work at a great facility with a well-run. It's a well-run organization, and so I think Masai was probably very well informed by Paul George and very well informed by, if we want to do this with the Celtics and Sixers coming up, and the Bucks, I mean, it's before the Bucks, like, we need to do this. Like, and it's a risk. Yeah, sure, it's a risk. We're going to do it. And so I think that's kind of the calculus.
Listeners will find this hard to believe because we do it so often with so many of the guests, but I actually wasn't going to get into the whole, would you deal Jason Tatum for Anthony Davis, because I think it's just such an overwhelming camp that would. I am in the shrinking camp that would not do it. But since you brought it up, what would you do?
I have been going back and forth on this, not the least of which because Tatum is still under such a great deal. You're always trading contracts. You're not trading even potential. Like, that deal for another 3 seasons is just so favorable. I mean, you're going to get more value out of Tatum than you would Davis. And that's just something you have to consider. Now, that said, I want to look at what I'm looking at in April. And I know this sounds like a cop-out, but you just don't have the information. What is the ceiling of this team? If you get to the finals and you have a sense that, look, and there's still growth among these guys. Now, you can argue, hey, Horford's going to be a little older. He's not going to get better. But when you sort of balance the books and look at the talent on the team and is there still growth here? Is this our ceiling? And if the answer is no, boy, it makes it tough. I think you also really have to have I mean, to me, the other variable, why I can't make a call yet is, we think, I mean, if you want to bet on yourself, but let's get a probability. Is AD telling us, and Rich Paul drives hard. Are they really going to just rent out and just go to the Lakers? Because here's what I'm concerned about. He's indicated clearly that money isn't the issue. So a 4-year deal for less, he doesn't care. He just clearly doesn't care. I mean, so you can get more here has ceased to be a persuasive thing. I mean, look what the deal Paul George signed here for 3 years. I mean, it's clearly, I think we've gotten to the point with the cap and sort of max salaries where that law of diminishing returns, which is the extra money just isn't as important as it used to be. And so I want to have a probability. If the probability is any less than 70% that, if things work out well here, he will stay, I'm really skittish. I just am. And I have confidence that the Celtics, have as strong a culture and that Brad is probably, as much the kind of guy, the kind of coach guys want to play for, that I think you still bet on yourself. And probably if you have that probability, you probably do it. But I need to have really ironclad, good probability and confidence that he would stay. And because that deal Tatum is on is really amazing. And because if you deal Tatum and you don't retain Davis, you have, because the picks at some point after Memphis are going to start subsiding. And, I have, Ainge can probably pull a rabbit out of his hat as much as any executive in the league, but it's going to require some rabbit pulling because the conference is getting tougher. And so the risk of losing both, if you will, is just so extreme. Yet I'm starting to believe that given the mystery teams and who's going to be the Raptors in this scenario, that the Celtics probably would have to include Tatum in a deal. Like, I just, everyone's like, well, they still have the best. And we were kind of going through it. Well, you're talking about the Memphis pick. Jalen is nice, but, is that enough? And so that's going to be it's going to be a really tough call.
Last quick break to tell you today's show is brought to you by The Athletic. If you haven't heard about The Athletic by now, you got to be living under a rock, right? These guys have been crushing every element of sports coverage imaginable. Whether you're looking for specific local coverage with beat guys, sports discussed under a national lens, or anything in between, you have to take a look at The Athletic. No pop-ups, no ads, Just high-quality content waiting behind every single click. Jay King and Jared Weiss, some of the most knowledgeable guys that cover the Celtics. Also friends of this show. You can check them both out. They write for The Athletic. Plus, you got Shams Charania, Sam Amick, Frank Isola, bunch of other great NBA and college basketball writers. You can't get content like this anywhere else. 600, 750 new articles every week? Who else is pushing out quality content like that? If you haven't signed up yet, take advantage of this deal because it's not going to last forever. Go to theathletic.com/CelticsBeat. Get 40% off your monthly subscription. That's a subscription for less than $3 a month just by going to theathletic.com/CelticsBeat. Shams, Amick, King, Weiss, all for less than $3 a month? Sign me up. Sign yourself up. Go to theathletic.com/CelticsBeat. All right, back to the show. Kevin, let's end with this because, one, I've kept you longer than I said I would, and two, it brings us full circle nicely. The thing that brought us together were comments that you had made last April about how other NBA coaches, or at least one in particular, how they view Brad Stevens. You said at the time that this anonymous coach believed that he's overrated. Now, back then, he'd only won one conference final game in his career. You could make the case over the last couple of years. You could make a strong argument Brad Stevens for Coach of the Year. We know he has not won it yet, but you could make that case. It was telling, I think, in some ways, that his coaching community, his peers, his brethren, he didn't get a single vote for Coach of the Year last year. Now, this year, I think it's a wide belief. I certainly feel this way. He's underachieved. Is he being exposed in any way?
All right, I'm really glad we're talking about this because, and I normally, I'm not a Twitter guy, and I don't really care what people say. I've got a nice life, and I'm generally a happy person.
Good.
What I don't like is confusion. What I don't like is I'm sort of also an orderly person, and I take umbrage with confusion. And I got another bout of it the other day because I went on The Jump and talked about that this is a real, true challenge for Stevens, this team and the chemistry issues. So I'm glad we can clear this up. Just to review for your audience, on Zach Lowe's podcast, I think the function of Zach Lowe's podcast, if anybody out there listens to it, I think a lot of people do, is it's a place where NBA journalists go and kind of talk about the chats we have when the microphones aren't on. We kind of give up a lot of our background, what we call sort of on background chats. And the whole origin of the story was I was sitting with a really well-regarded assistant coach who might be a head coach one day, and kind of singing the praises of Brad Stevens the way so many of us in the media do. Like, this is the guy you want, you hire when you're rebuilding, and he could not only usher in sort of a team to prominence, but could really then preside over it, right? Like, the whole basis of the conversation is I was sitting there doing the Brad Stevens song, okay?
Sure.
And the coach said, hey, and he did it very respectfully. He said, hey, listen, can I just stop you for a second? We all admire Brad. I mean, we all steal from Brad. But, you guys talk, you put him on Mount Rushmore, and you talk about him in terms that you reserve almost exclusively maybe for Greg Popovich. Again, we all admire him, but hey, why don't you guys slow down? He's won, a single conference finals game. By the way, this notion that he does a lot with a little is expired because there's a lot there, and, at the time he had, I think Kyrie maybe just, it didn't look like it was going to be a long-term injury, whatever it was. I don't remember the exact timing. But, you have these high picks. You got Al. You got, and Al was very much revered in the community, in the coaching community. And, I think there was just a sense that, hey, can you guys slow down on the Stevens idolatry? When I relayed that story, I presented it as sort of a counter argument to Zach and I, who are sort of, I've always considered myself in the Stevens camp, and you can find this in my writing, swooning about the culture he establishes, right? Mm-hmm. So the whole nature of the talk, I related because I find interesting counter arguments that are, I like to steel man my arguments rather than straw man them. I am always curious about someone providing a devil's advocate that is thoughtful, that comes from authority. So I relayed this message, and it was as much about conveying about professional jealousy in the coaching world, because coaches are some of the most interesting, bizarre people in the world, assistants and head coaches. They're all paranoid, first of all. They're all literally paranoid. And there's a little bit of professional jealousy. They can be a little bitchy, too. And so I conveyed it as sort of a story, isn't this interesting? This guy, the chasm of opinion between media people and maybe you could maybe throw Bostonians in there, who often can be really hard on coaches, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the coaching community, which reveres Brad, but the guy also said that the coach also said, hey, look at some of the guys around the league who are doing amazing things with nothing, who have established wonderful cultures. They just don't get the credit, and you guys have sort of elevated Brad, and we think he's good. But, let's see a little more. And, there are a lot of other guys you guys never mention who just do a year, with nothing. The coach brought up, Terry Stotts. He's like, just look, Terry was supposed to be rebuilding for 3 years. And he, fast-tracked that. And so that was the point of the story. I felt exonerated when the coaches voted, and 8 guys got votes. Brad Stevens wasn't one of them. Now, that confirmed my story that coaches in the league don't carry the same regard as the media, which is my whole point. This notion that I'm out on Brad. Then on the jump, and I got a little bit of pushback the other day, one of the things I said is, look, Brad is spoken about as sort of an elite coach. This is his first real test. There's always been this notion that his culture, that nobody builds a culture like Brad Stevens. I've been on that train. This is different. This is a true test. Brad is undeniably tactically brilliant. I mean, he's almost Rain Man in his capacity. I was working on a story before they, in case he made the finals about, I've been told Brad has such a vision that that he can watch a basketball possession live, and if you just kind of stopped it at the end of that possession, he could tell you what all 10 guys were doing. Even the best coaches usually have to go to film or ask an assistant. For you to be able to watch from the sidelines and commit to memory what all 10 guys did, it's an incredible talent. But the job in the NBA in 2019, the distribution of tactics and management, it has swung so far to management. The truth is, all these guys run good stuff. And the task at hand now is, can you keep the team together? Can you keep everybody rowing in the right direction? And that is a painstaking process with an enormous degree of difficulty. And so what I said on the jump, and then everyone, a bunch of Celtic fanatics got, Kevin Arnovitz, blaming it on Brad Stevens again. No, I'm not blaming it on Brad Stevens. What I'm saying is this is a real test for him. If he is truly as good as members of the media regard him as, this is going to be a real test. Can he keep these guys all on the same page, keep them from killing one another, and advance to a finals or at least a very, competitive, like last year, conference finals performance? Because if you do believe he is the elite of the elite, this is a test. I don't mind challenging, coaches and players for that matter I really revere and say, hey, this is a test. Because I think we're sometimes just too fixed in our opinions. We can modulate. We can have our confidence in a player and a coach. By the way, outside of basketball, in a friend and a mate. I mean, they're always tests. We don't know. I mean, and this so far is they're always tests. People can fail and succeed over time, and a body of work is determined in judgment, different ways at different junctures. We all thought this player was great. Oh, it turned out that he didn't have the endurance, or when he was put to the test, he wasn't that guy. Or wait, dedication wanes over time, or we make assumptions about people's efficacy, and it turns out hey, we overrated it a little bit, or we underrated it a little bit. Brad Stevens may go down as one of the greatest coaches of his generation when it's all over. I would put that, and again, I'm a man who deals in probabilities. I don't think people are great or awful. I think the probability of Brad Stevens going down as one of the great coaches of his generation is relatively high to anybody of these other young coaches. There's a probability that he's going to go down as a very, very good coach. And that's all I'm saying is there's a sense in the community that we don't have the track record yet. And there is something about the Boston effect, which is because fans are so knowledgeable and so passionate, everything gets amplified. A guy who is very, very good and showing a lot of promise becomes, the greatest of all time. A guy who struggles a little bit becomes, get this guy out of here, right? It is like Boston was
here?
Almost,
no.
Before right. Before social media was social media, Boston was almost real life Twitter. 30 years before there was even a thing, where, this notion on social media is an opinion moves further and further to the extreme with each passing moment, right?
Yeah.
Like, whether it's politics or culture or whatever it is. And Boston's very much like that. So that was the whole point. I'm not out on Brad Stevens. I admire the comportment. As somebody who's trying to kind of incorporate mindfulness in his life and meditating, like, God, if I could go through one day in my life with the comportment of Brad Stevens, it will be total salvation for me.
Likewise.
Man, I watched that guy. It's amazing. And that can't be anything other than an additive. Like, that has to have an effect on guys, right? Like, to see that kind of steely, measured confidence where nothing is too, the highs are never too high, the lows are never too low. But I just think there's a lot of confusion among, and again, I don't think people are thinking about what I think about Brad Stevens, but it clearly was a community that took that and I think was very confused about the substance of my comments. And then again the other day, to say, what, does anyone disagree with me? Does anyone not believe the troubles that have afflicted the Celtics this year present a real challenge to Brad Stevens between now and June? Does anyone not believe that? Does anyone not believe that that's not going to be some test of his management skills? Of course it is. Why would you think otherwise? And that's all I said the other day, is this guy is revered as an all-time, really, it's true. The coach was right. We do speak of him in terms reserved really only for Greg Popovich,
coaching
maybe
deities.
Rick Carlisle.
Yeah,
and that's all. The coach is right about that. We do regard him in Boston and in the media. And that's, I don't mean to be repetitive, but does anyone not believe that this is not going to be a challenge? And that's all I said. And I said there's a lot of professional jealousy about Brad. Guess what? There was, and we saw it. Like, that's it. Those are the two claims. I stand by them, and I think folks who interpret that as hostility or criticism of Brad from me are deeply confused.
I'm glad we were able to clear it up, because I know obviously it's something that had lingered for a little while. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to share all of that. So I am glad we did it. To your point about his comportment, his meditation, everything like that. Like, that's the reason that I've often, Bill Simmons likes to call him the president. Other people like to call him whatever it is. I like to call him my life coach. That's how I view Brad Stevens. He is he is an NBA level guidance counselor, and I say that in the best possible way. The question, obviously, and we don't have an answer, and I don't want to discuss it right now simply because I've kept you as long as I have already, but and I don't think it's a particularly answerable question for the two of us, because Brad doesn't have an answer yet, is how do you get everyone on the same page down the stretch here? How do you find that chemistry that was so good last year, absent a couple of big stars, and now that everybody is back and relatively healthy and there are no significant serious injuries down the stretch, how do you discover chemistry which has really not been there all year long? And you're right, it's an exceptional challenge facing him, in the same way that I've always said about Danny Ainge. Going back to the Nets trade, when he had all those picks coming his way, before there was a Tatum, before there was a Brown, before there was Irving here, I've said Danny Ainge is in an incredibly enviable position. That being said, I wouldn't want to be him, because he has to get it right. And that was always the thing with Ainge. It remains the thing with Ainge, and to that end, it's the thing with Stevens.
And by the way, it's the thing with 30 GMs and 30 coaches.
Yep.
But it's so interesting. And by the way, I'm having a great time, so you're not keeping me.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
It's a wonderful conversation. I hope we do it again soon.
Absolutely.
It truly is. The X's and O's, I think because of scouting, because of just sheer experience, that's the easy part now. Sure, adjustments and in-game adjustments, and Brad's a fantastic in-game coach. Just truly. Carlisle, I still think, is the best at that. But Brad's right there. But what's been, and you see it, everything we talked about for 45 minutes, right? Kyrie and the free agent speculation and media and everything else. Like, the truth is X's and O's is the easy part now. It really is. And you've got brilliant assistants and defensive coordinators, and you can watch the film, and you can make, literally they're watching the film in game now, and making the adjustments. So that's the easy part. The hard part is being the CEO. You've got demanding executives who are under tremendous pressure, who second guess you. Even the really patient ones. They it's never copacetic. Wait, I've heard respectful critiques of Brad's coaching X's and O's style from people inside the Celtics front office. By the way, that is no news scoop. I have yet to hear in talking with any executive or scout for a team, or hell, even sometimes assistant coaches, like, I'm trying to get them to believe, like, that is normal. But the responsibilities of the job, because of everything we've been talking about, that's really where they make their grade now, is can you keep this team together? It's why I think like Dave Yeager's doing such a great job in Sacramento with like a team that we thought were going to win 18 games. I mean, I know everyone in Boston thought, ooh, goody. We've got the number 2 or 3 pick, right? Yep. Because I heard it all September and October.
That was the belief.
I mean, to turn that crappy franchise that has had like the black cloud over it since like 1841, since like Sutter explored Central California in the 19th century, right? Like, I have so much admiration because like there are a lot of young guys who think they're the man, and yet it's like, God, you go to Sac and spend a week there and it's the happiest place on earth. And they're like, for basically 500. It's why I have so much respect for Kenny Atkinson. Who are these guys? And they all believe in their talents and they're all just play their asses off every night, and I just think that is now the grade. And so to the extent we can, if you want to judge Brad Stevens, I'm not a terribly judgmental person. But if you want to judge him, this is the exam now. This is his graduate level thesis. I have a kind of a nutty best player. I've got a guy who's a max guy who's trying to rebuild his confidence, and it's hard. Like even I think Hayward has been a really interesting project for them because it's like, how do you build about a guy's confidence again? And given that we want to win a championship, we want to build up his confidence, but frankly, we don't always want him on the floor, given that he's not the guy we thought he was. How do you calm down, young guys who are, exuberant, but also temperamental? Brown is such a complicated, such a smart, but really complicated human being. I love Jaylen Brown. I mean, that's a different conversation for a different day. But yeah, that's a project too. But this is the challenge for every coach in the league, is we've gone from being it's the days of Hubie Brown are over, right? Where, he's just a brilliant tactician. Mike D'Antoni's not even Mike D'Antoni anymore, right? Like, his project is entirely different now.
Yep.
I mean, he's done with the intellectual part of his career. Like, meanwhile, they're not playing anything like D'Antoni ball. It's anti-D'Antoni ball. The ball finds energy? No, the ball does not find energy in Houston anymore. It finds one guy.
And he shoots from 3, and that's about it.
Yeah, and that's it. But that's the thing. And so the entire league has changed, even if you've only been a fan for 10 years. Like, it is, we're at the most volatile point in sort of NBA kind of thinking and just all of these issues. It's just it's just unknowable. I think everyone has whiplash in the league. Every GM who thought he knew everything is just like, what is going on? Like, every scout who thought this is color by numbers. No, they're just like, what is going on? Every player is like, wait, I used to be able to say stuff and it was just linger and maybe it would appear in a column or one blogger. And it's like, everyone is like, what is going on? This is like chaos in the league right now. And it's got everybody on edge.
We'll leave it there, but we, like you, I had a great time. We'll absolutely do it again. I really appreciate you hopping on, and there's so much to pick through, even just from the chat that we had that, like you said, we barely touched on, really didn't touch at all on Hayward, on Brown, on so many of the challenges facing this team down the stretch. So I do look forward to doing it again, hopefully soon.
You bet.
Kevin Arnovitz of ESPN. Find him ESPN the magazine, ESPN.com, on the jump. He stays busy, and we'll definitely get him here on the Celtics Beat podcast once again. I know we ran a little long. My producer and everyone else probably going to kill me, but I love that. Kevin Arnovitz, ESPN. That was a really, really good, insightful, intelligent chat. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Hopefully we'll do it again in the not-too-distant future. Maybe right around playoff time, but we are going to get out of here. Today's show brought to you by betonline.ag. Go to clnsmedia.com/win or use the promo code CLNS50 to get a 50% bonus on your next deposit. Show also brought to you by Mint Mobile. Get your new wireless plan and a new SIM card shipped to you for free for just $15 at mintmobile.com/podcast. Also, we are brought to you by The Athletic. Get 40% off your monthly subscription just by going to theathletic.com/CelticsBeat. As usual, thanks to Evan, to Larry, John, Nick, everybody else at CLNS Media. Most of all, thanks to you. Subscribe to the Celtics Beat podcast. You can find us on iTunes, on Stitcher, on YouTube. I will tweet the show out. I always do. And a subsection of additional tweets all about the show over the course of a week just to annoy you and make sure that you are hearing it. We always appreciate the listenership. Hell, you can get us on YouTube as well and subscribe to the CLNS feed there. Loads of Player Sound, the other CLNS shows across sports, not just Celtics. See how things go.
Hello, I'm Dan Lothian, host of the Behind the Media podcast on the CLNS Media Network. Along with Jimmy Young, we dive into the biggest media headlines each week with honest, informed, and sometimes irreverent perspectives. It's not all serious. We deliver information and entertainment. As we like to say on Behind the Media, we find the interesting in media so you don't have to go searching for it. Listen to our podcast and get prepped for the next trip to the water cooler. Subscribe to Behind the Media wherever you get your podcast, or find us on www.clnsmedia.com.